And welcome to the sixth podcast of Jono Talks. I'm here today with Joshua Galbraith. With the Australian Open starting tomorrow, Joshua has a unique and comprehensive role managing the ball kid squad, which is essential to the smooth running of a tennis match. Previous to this, Joshua has been a ball boy himself and was one of the lucky ones when he was awarded by being a part of the main ball kid squad for the Australian Open final between Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic in 2013. Joshua has also worked as a ball steward for the AFL. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks, Jono. Thanks for having me, mate.
All good. And just a quick disclaimer before we start. This is in a different studio, so the camera positioning is slightly different, but it should work all good. So, Joshua, how did you first get involved as a ball boy? Where did you first hear about it?
Yeah, look, I was an avid watcher of the tennis and attended the Australian Open from pretty much the age of sort of 4 or 5. Every year was going and always wanted to be a ball boy. And sort of got some information through other people I knew involved in tennis and found out that the age limit was 12 to 15. So when I was eligible, I first applied and went for a tryout at the local club, got myself in there, and then eventually got the opportunity through a lot of training and trialling with the ball kid operations team during the 2009. And by the end of the year was rewarded with an opportunity in selection for the 2010 Australian Open.
Did some people in those tryouts miss out on becoming a ball boy or ball girl?
Yeah, there certainly is. We have a squad of 380 or thereabouts every year.
Yeah.
But the reality is we have about 2,000 to 2,500 kids apply every year. And I think that number continues to grow.
Oh, wow.
So there's plenty of kids who do miss out, unfortunately. But it's certainly a competitive environment to get into.
So is that where most people hear about it? So just like at local clubs, and did you have to do? So what type of training did you have to do to get involved?
The training's certainly fairly rigorous, and every year it's becoming more and more rigorous. We have 2 trials. So the first one's at a local club, as I've mentioned before, and then if you progress from that point on, you get to a level 2 trial, where you go into Melbourne Park, where obviously the Australian Open's played. And that's when the squad is cut even further. Yeah. And following on from that trial, we have fairly consistent trainings from about June, July through to the end of the year, where they work at a tournament at the December Showdown, where they have the national championships as well as the wildcard players for the Australian Open. So that's sort of their match practice before we have the qualifying tournament in January, and then obviously the main draw tournament is starting tomorrow.
So when you did the very first tryouts at your local club, who came down from the Australian Open to assess you?
We had one of our ball kid staff, so what I am now. They came down to the local club as well as the local coach who was also there, sort of helping with the drills and whatnot. And those supervisors sort of looked over, made sure we could do the basics. And those who could do the basics basically got through the opportunity to do the level 2 trial. And you mentioned that in the training that it was quite a rigorous selection process and the skills involved. Because I noticed in tennis matches, the ball kid squad, there's a lot of things you have to be aware of. You have to be focused. You have to roll the balls out. So is that hard to maintain your concentration all the time? Yeah, it certainly is. It's certainly not as easy as what a lot of people think it might be. It's not quite as easy as just rolling a tennis ball up and down the court. There's certainly some intimate things that people don't really recognise. But yeah, certainly I think as much in Melbourne as anywhere else in the world, this is probably as hard a place to be able to concentrate every day, hour on hour, given the extreme conditions. But yeah, our kids do a terrific job.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the heat, sometimes, especially in the summer of Melbourne, sometimes it reaches, above, 30 degrees. Have you ever had situations where you've had to postpone a match because it was just too hot? For instance, I think at the Australian Open they have like a heat rule if it gets above a certain temperature. What temperature is that? Are you aware of?
Yeah, we actually had the situation on Wednesday. Obviously, it was a fairly warm day on Wednesday afternoon.
Over 40 degrees, yeah.
It was the first day of our qualifying tournament. And once the temperature hit 40 degrees, they decided to postpone matches, which was about 3 o'clock, I think, 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon. But yeah, obviously it wasn't cold before that. It was still in the high 30-degree temperatures. So it was tough for our kids to concentrate. But as I say, they're the best in the world for a reason. So they did a terrific job.
And do you have any strict hydration procedures you have to go through on hot days? Like, for instance, do you recommend that the ball kids squad, they drink a certain amount? Are there any strict diet requirements?
There's no specific diet or hydration requirements that we make sure that the kids do, but it is sort of a recommended thing that they have during the day. They have sort of hour on, hour off sessions. So they'll be on the court for an hour and then they'll have a break for an hour. And we do suggest to them that they drink at least sort of a bottle of water, which is sort of around the 600 mils, at least in between each session. And then they have a drink bottle out in court with them. So they do tend to drink a fair few litres of water across a day's work.
Because I notice in matches, not necessarily the ball kids squad, but when the Australian Open players come to Melbourne, you know, you always see when they're sitting down, they always have not just like they have like multiple water bottles, you know, say like you know, Powerade, a Gatorade, and then you'd have like a massive amount of water bottles as well. Another question I wanted to ask you was, I'm not sure if this has been a recent development in recent years, but some Australian Open players, they request that for their rackets to be restringed sometimes. Does the ball kids squad control that, or is that a different department?
Nah, the restringing of rackets is more court services and also the stringers. So there's people who are employed as stringers, so on the machines stringing the rackets, and also the court services people are the people who sort of make sure all the players have what they need prior to a match. Make sure they have all their rackets ready, their waters ready, their Powerades ready, whatever else they need. But then once the game started and it's on court, that's the kid's job. So during a change of ends, a player might ask a kid to grab a water bottle or a Powerade out of the fridge. Yeah. And that's what our kids have to do once the game starts. But prior to a match, that's sort of the role of court services.
And how, before a match starts, does the ball kid squad come before the players? Onto the court, yeah.
Well, our ruling is that we tell our kids that once one player's on the court, they have to come onto the court, because we have, obviously, 2 net kids have to service the player that's on the court with drink bottles, with towels, with whatever else they need. Yeah. So it's once the first player comes onto the court, our kids will go out into the court, yeah.
So have you been involved in both sides? So have you been like a net boy, but because you're quite tall, so have you been like a net? Like, what's the official terms? What have you been involved in, basically?
Yeah, we have 2 positions, so it's either a net kid or a baseliner.
Baseline, yeah.
Given that I was quite tall and I was tall very young, I never got the opportunity to be a net kid, because it's sort of the smallest kids that we have will be the net kids, and also our quickest kids, which anyone who knows me, probably that isn't my strength. But yeah, we have our taller kids like me who'd be on the baseline, and then the smallest kids that we have in the squad will be our nets. So what kind of practice do you need? What specific practice do you need to do to become like a baseliner? Well, it's the same. The skills are all the same. So the skills for our baseliners and net kids are all the same. But it's more the application of those skills and the knowledge that they need for players and the servicing of players. So obviously, as a baseliner, that's the kid who has to service the player with the towel. Yeah. And all players had sort of intricacies that a layman wouldn't pick up. So like there's players who will only take a tennis ball from one-sided, so only one kid, or they'll leave the towel with one kid, or there's all sorts of different intricacies some players have. But yeah, the skills necessarily aren't different from a baseline kid to a net kid. And do you remember the first match you got involved in as a baseline official? Yeah, I think I do, actually. I think it was, as I said before, we have the December Showdown tournament, which occurs in the first 2 weeks of December. which involves sort of our wildcard playoffs and our national championships at junior level.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty confident that the first match I had involved a men's playing Leighton Hewitt on Tuesday in the Australian Open round 1, and that was James Duckworth.
Yes.
At the time, he might have been about a 17, 18-year-old kid in the wildcard playoffs. I'm pretty sure he ended up getting through a couple of rounds of that tournament. But now, 5-6 years later, he's going to be out there on centre court probably on Tuesday night against Leighton Hewitt in the first round of the Australian Open.
Yeah. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a bit of a shame, to be honest, because I'm sure Leighton wouldn't want to be beating a fellow Aussie, but I know that the Australian crowd would love to see Leighton Hewitt get as far as he can in his last tournament here.
Yeah, absolutely, because it is his last tournament. And so when you so your first match that you got involved in was with Leighton Hewitt?
No. Sorry, my first match was with James Duckworth, the man who'll play on Tuesday night. That was in a wildcard playoff. I think, I think he was about 17, 18 years of age, probably about that point. And yeah, now he's playing out on centre court on Tuesday.
So does the main, how do you decide who does because you mentioned to me there's, quite a few applicants or more than quite a few applicants for the Australian Open. How do you decide who is involved in what match and what court to go on?
Yeah, our role as ball kid supervisors is not just to look after the kids. We also obviously train them during the year, but then come tournament time, we also assess them daily. And from those gradings, we decipher sort of our best kids, and we put those best kids on the bigger courts. But as I say, there's plenty of kids, and I think the level continues to increase. So there's plenty of kids who are certainly capable of being out on centre court or any of our show courts. So yeah, that's sort of the assessment part of the tournament for us.
And are you enjoying the role as a ball kid squad supervisor?
Yeah, I certainly am. It's a great role. We have 380 kids, and they're brilliant to work with. We had Andy Murray with them on Tuesday at our media launch.
I saw that.
Yeah, I'm sure people saw that online on Facebook and whatnot.
Yeah.
And as he said, they're the best in the world for a reason. We have probably the toughest conditions in the world. And the stakes of the Grand Slam are as high as any tournament in the world. And our kids are the best in the world for a reason. And that's because they're on the court, they're terrific. And then off the court, they're just as good. So it's a great role.
Do you do any comparisons with overseas tournaments?
With our ball kids? Yeah. We, as soon as we walk into the job, the first thing our boss told us was, you'll never watch a tennis match the same ever again. And she's 100% spot on, because as much as you love watching the tennis, your eyes are fixed on the kids as well, even though you don't know them. Just the different ways that they do things around the world. Like in the US Open, they actually throw the ball from one end of the court to the other. So you watch that, you watch the different things, the ways they do it differently around the world. But I think, as I say, in Melbourne, we're the best in the world. We do the most training. Our kids are as prepared as any, and I think it's shown out in the courts every day of the 2 weeks.
Yeah, and also, do you do the most training out of any?
Yeah, in Melbourne here for the Australian Open, our training is as comprehensive as any in the world. We do, as I say, sort of 6 months of training. The kids will each train sort of half a dozen to 10 times during the year, whereas most tournaments only do 1 or 2 trainings before in the couple of weeks leading up. So our training is as good as any. The quality of our training is brilliant. And the commitment of the kids throughout the year, and also their parents to transport them to and from trainings, is first class.
And so you start quite a bit before the Australian Open even begins. So because you need that kind of preparation. So what's involved there? Is it more match simulation type training?
Yeah, well, from this point, right at this moment, we have applications for 2017 already open.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Online applications. So 12 to 15-year-olds for next year are able to apply for next year already. And then, as I say, the first couple of trials we have are mostly skill-based. So we work on their rolling techniques and their servicing techniques and whatnot. But then once we get into sort of June, July, and in the months following that, it's a lot of match practice. We have hitters come in and they sort of help us give the kids practice in match situations. So they learn not only the skills, but also what they should be doing from point to point in matches. So it's a good learning technique for our kids, and they do it well.
Mm-hmm. And 12 to 15 years of age, do you think that's the correct age bracket between what is eligible upon entry and when you have to leave? Do you think that or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think as much as I know every year the top age kids, so in my year when I was 15 and then the years past and the years before, we want to stay on forever, but reality is it's not going to be how it works.
Yeah.
As much as it's one of the greatest experiences in the world, it has to end at some point. And in my position, I know there's plenty of other kids who have worked as ball kids through to their 15th birthday, 16th birthday, and following on from that have worked in other roles at the Australian Open. So I think if the age limit wasn't limited, it would turn into a bit of a the same old. And I think as much as anything, bringing new kids in every year makes the group and the whole tournament just change. And I think that's the best bit. Like every year we have a fairly significant amount of new kids. And as much as the old kids are always great, it's always great to get new kids in. And it also gives the young kids opportunities. Mm-hmm. So if someone came in as a 12-year-old and there's still kids who have been there for 6, 7, 8 years, it's going to make it really hard for them to get opportunities. So if we limit the age, every kid gets an opportunity at one point or another.
Mm-hmm. Is that consistent across or around the world? Is that set by the governing body of tennis, or is that just a Tennis Australia thing?
Nah, the age limits very much vary around the world, and the eligibility of kids. So in Melbourne we're 12 to 15, but other places around Australia, they're a bit different. They're sort of 12 to 16, I think. So there's some different ages, but then around the world, again, going back to the US Open, they're pretty much adults.
Really?
They're not actually children. So, yeah, and then in Wimbledon, there's different rules again. Not sure sort of other tournaments around the world, but yeah, there's certainly different rules around the world about who is eligible and who is not.
Mm-hmm. And I think your last match you were involved in was the Australian Open final. Was that how was that experience?
Yeah, the 2013 final was something pretty special for me. I got that opportunity a couple of days before the final and knew sort of what I was set for on the Sunday night, and the whole build up for those 2 days before the match was something I'd never experienced before, and then walking out onto Rod Laver Arena on that Sunday night was something I'll never experience again. I don't think it was something I'll never forget.
Did you, because, Novak Djokovic and Andy Murray are obviously, very good players. I think they're in the top, 5?
Yeah, I think they're 1 and 2 going into Melbourne tomorrow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, number 1 and 2 seeds. So you never know, we might have, in 2 weeks' time, we might be sitting here talking about Andy Murray and Novak Djokovic going head-to-head again in the men's final. Yeah,
you never know, absolutely. Did you get a chance to take a photo with them because it was your last match?
Yeah, every year we have the champion. So obviously in 2013 we had Novak Djokovic beat Andy Murray in that final. Mm-hmm. And every year we have the kids who will take our ball kids squad from that match will take a photo with the champion. So the 12 of us who worked in that match were lucky enough post the match to go out into centre court once again with Novak Djokovic, who had the trophy, and the 12 of us gathered around and had a photo. It's the same for all the finals. All the kids will get the opportunity to have a photo with the champion. Or champions if it's a doubles final. And they're certainly memories that will last a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. And because that was a night match, I was going to ask you, when you were a ball boy, which day did you prefer to, which time of the day did you prefer to do your role as a baseline official?
Certainly for the quality of the matches and the sort of the atmosphere, the night sessions were always awesome. The night sessions on centre court were sort of the pinnacle, I guess. As a ball kid, you always wanted that opportunity to be out there on centre court for a night session match.
Yeah.
The biggest TV audiences, the biggest crowds inside the arena, and generally the best players. Mm-hmm. Night session matches generally the ones that you really cherish, and they're the ones you sort of remember for much longer. I'll never forget Leighton Hewitt out there on centre court. For the life of me, I can't remember the man who played, but the atmosphere out there that night was something, extraordinary with the Australian crowd, 15,000 people behind Leighton. Hard to ever imagine that you'd ever experience something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how do you rate our Australian Open chances, our local hopes? So obviously, Kokianakis has an injury, so he won't.
Yeah, that's a shame.
He won't. Yeah, that's a shame because he's an up-and-coming player. You were telling me before that Tomic was doing really well beforehand.
Yeah, Tomic, I believe, is now the number 16 seed coming into Melbourne tomorrow, which puts him in a great position given the sort of the intricacies of the draw, meaning he won't play a top 10 player, I believe, until the fourth round, which is great for him. Obviously, should get him through to around about the end of the first week, if not into the second week. And as I say, he's a massive chance of getting through to a quarter or semi-final. And I think it'd be great for Australian tennis because it's been a fair while since we've had an Australian male particularly get through that sort of time in the tournament. I think Bernie's probably our best chance. Obviously, we got Nick Kyrgios as well. Certainly on the way up on the court. If he can sort his life out off the court and then be a changed player, it'll help him in the next couple of years because he's certainly got all the talent in the world.
Yeah, I think both players are very talented. And I guess that was one of the issues with Tomic. The Tennis Australia, he had issues with what was his name, Pat Rafter, and all that. Has his attitude, because wasn't he excluded from the Davis Cup squad?
At one point or another, both of them I think have been excluded from the Davis Cup squad. I'm pretty sure it was the last tie we played when we went to England and played Great Britain. Actually, I think it was in Scotland and played Great Britain. Yes. Nick Kyrgios, I'm pretty sure did not play in that tie, which, as I say, is pretty disappointing given that he's our number 2 player in Australia. But same with Bernie. He's had his issues with the Davis Cup and Tennis Australia, but I think they're on the mend. And hopefully that'll turn him to a much better player and get him that opportunity to sort of break into the top 10 by the end of the year.
Are they back in the Davis Cup squad now?
Well, they haven't named this Davis Cup squad for the upcoming tie in March, but I'd imagine that both of them hopefully will be because, let's be honest, they're our best 2 players and we need them.
Oh, yeah, and especially because Leighton Hewitt, is retiring as well.
And Leighton taking over the role as Davis Cup captain, hopefully he can straighten him out a bit. And, Bernie and Nick will hopefully be a big force for Davis Cup tennis for Australia for a long, long time to come. Yeah,
absolutely. Because, there was even a moment where, Hewitt has good relationships with all the Australian Open players, but there was a time when he had a bit of a rift with Tomic as well. Yeah. That happened. It's not, from the outside looking in, it's not a good thing if you have all these attitude problems occurring with Tennis Australia, especially when you're idolising. When I grew up, or I don't know if you grew up, we kind of Leighton Hewitt was the guy, and now we have, a good, we have Tomic, Kyrgios. We also have someone else, not quite in that bracket, but I forgot his name. He's a good server.
Sam Groth.
Yeah. Do you rate him?
He's a bit older than those 2 guys, but he's in a similar situation given he's got a different story. He was a very good young player and then sort of gave the game away for a year or so and played footy, actually. Played AFL. Played for just a local club. Following that season, decided that he wanted to come back into tennis and since then has come on in leaps and bounds and is the reigning Newcombe medalist, which is the sort of top award in tennis in Australia. I heard about that. So he's certainly improving and hopefully over his last sort of handful of years in tennis, he might break through for some titles and who knows, maybe a Grand Slam.
And you mentioned John Newcombe. Did you know that I actually met John Newcombe once I won my mother entered me into an Optus tournament thing, and it was just some training with so for instance, I had training with, it was just a one-day thing. I had training with Tony Roach, who at the time was Roger Federer's coach.
Yeah, he's coached a few of those. Coached Leighton Hewitt, I think, as well at one point.
Yeah, he coached. Doesn't he still coach Leighton?
I'm not sure who coaches Leighton, but he's
been a long time.
He's certainly involved with Leighton. I'm not sure whether he's officially the coach, but given that this is Leighton's last 2 weeks, he won't be the coach for much longer. But yeah, he certainly had a significant involvement in Leighton's career.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and definitely Roger Federer's as well when he began. And so I won a tournament there, just like an Optus thing competition, and I saw John Newcomb. I think I saw one of the Woodbridge brothers as well. Not too sure. But that was quite interesting because I remember Tony Roach. We were doing volleys. We were practicing volleys, and Tony Roach was like, "Yeah, Federer can hit them really cleanly. He can hit it here."
There's not much that man can't do.
Yeah, I know. He's just
he's a freak.
Yeah. Do you consider him the greatest tennis player to ever play the game?
Certainly the best I've ever seen. Obviously, I'm not that old, but he's certainly the best that I've seen. And I think, given the different eras of tennis, this sort of era being as professional as we've ever seen, it's probably the hardest era to be as successful as he's been. Hopefully he can get over the line and get another Grand Slam title because he's closing in on 20, which should be a fair effort. But yeah, as I say, on the male side, he's far and away the best player I've ever seen. Yeah,
because it was really unfortunate. He had a great year last year, but Novak Djokovic was just in sublime form.
Yeah, he's I think pretty much in all 4 Grand Slams, he got so close, but not quite.
Yeah.
He was sort of that last 4, but couldn't quite get over the line. Hopefully in 2016, he might be able to break through and get one.
Yeah. I was hoping, because in Wimbledon he was playing really well, and then Novak Djokovic beat him in the final, and then was the other one the US Open, and then he beat him in the was it the ATP Barclays, the England tournament as well,
end of season championships.
Yeah, and I felt so sorry for him because Novak Djokovic was just
Novak's had an unbelievable last sort of 3 or 4 years. Sort of taking over the mantle from Roger and Rafa. Obviously with Rafa's injury issues, but Novak's been hard to beat in the last few years. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and some people would argue though that Nadal could make a position to be named as one of the greatest that have played the game because head to head with Roger, he's got a far more superior win to loss ratio with Roger. But one of the things about this though is that when Roger and Rafael Nadal play, the thing is that the styles are different. So Rafael has he's a left-handed grip, and Roger's what they call, I don't know, not his weakness, but the one area that he has troubles with sometimes is when it's really high to his backhand. And typically on clay, Rafael Nadal would, like lots of top spin, and loop the ball over to his backhand. Do you think the head-to-head between Rafa and Roger should be taken seriously when considering that debate of who's the greatest?
I don't think it's much of a debate. I think Roger's definitely the best, but I think probably that head-to-head record is, as you say, a bit sort of miscued with Rafa because of his dominance on clay. I think since about 2005, I think he's only lost 1 French Open title.
Yeah.
He's just been dominant on clay, and I think a lot of the matches that he would have played against Roger would have been on clay, which probably sort of miscues the head-to-head records. But
yes.
If you'd probably take the clay matches out, it'd probably be a fairly significant advantage in Roger's favour, I would have thought. And that's why I think Roger is, the greatest player of the modern era, without a doubt.
And he also has that unique spot about him because most of the players now, they have like 2-handed backhands, and one of the things that I've always loved about Roger, and I adopted when I was playing tennis as a junior, I never had a 2-handed backhand, always copied his like 1-handed backhand because I really looked up to him. He holds the most number of weeks for staying world number 1, doesn't he?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't know the exact number, but
it's like 300 weeks or something.
Multiple years in a row. He was the number 1 player in the world, and he was very, very hard to beat.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Grand Slam after Grand Slam, week after week, there was very few that were able to beat him.
And that was at a time, you had like Andy Roddick.
Yeah, there were some pretty good players in that era, but Roger was just way too good.
Way too good, yeah. So, do you think Novak is in that bracket with Federer, Nadal, and
he's very, very quickly closing in if he's not already. I think he's been the world number 1 now for at least probably 2 years, if not more. yeah, if he's not in that bracket already, he's very much closing in at a very rapid rate.
Yeah, because he was one of those players who could actually beat Rafa on clay. Like he beat him quite a few times on clay in a year. I forgot which year it was, the Madrid Open. And
yeah, look, Novak's I can't remember the exact number of Grand Slams he's won, but it's well and truly past 10 now. And
I think it's exactly 10 actually.
Very quickly he will be 15 to 20, I reckon, no doubt. His ability on all three surfaces in Grand Slams, they're as good as any. So he's certainly sparking the debate of who's going to be the best of all time out of those three.
Because I'd say, people say, Federer's weakness is, clay. But, when you look at it, he's made the final quite a few times. It's just because Rafa has faced him there.
As we said, he's been pretty unlucky. I mean, any other era, he would have won probably 4 or 5 French Opens as well. But you're just running into isn't the man's named the King of Clay for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, as I say, I think he's won 9 out of the last 10 Roland Garros championships. And so, he's a freak.
And Roger Federer, I'm not sure what Australian Open he's appearing in. I know with Leighton Hewitt, I think this is his 20th appearance at the Australian.
This is number 20 in a row. He hasn't missed one yet. And
wow.
Unfortunately, next year is going to be a bit different.
Yeah,
a bit strange without him, but this is number 20 in a row for Leighton, and I think it might be about 16 or so for Roger.
Yeah, about 16, 17, yeah. And so he's, 30-something years old. He's, 34.
Leighton?
No, Roger.
Oh, yeah, I think Roger's around about that same age as Leighton, 32, 33, 34.
Yeah, and he's still competing.
He's still unbelievable, really. His fitness is as good as any. And his body seems to be still holding up okay. And he still has that competitive edge that he loves winning. And I think that's what any competitive tennis player needs, is that will to win and that want to win.
Yeah.
As soon as you lose that, I think it's time to give the game away. But Roger doesn't like he's losing that anytime soon. Yeah,
they always say when it comes to any sport, but particularly in tennis, like the mental side of the game can be what makes or breaks a tennis match.
Especially in individual sport, when it's just you out there on the court.
Yeah.
If it's a team sport like an AFL, there's at least 21 other players that you've got besides you. But in a tennis match, it's 1v1, and the mental battle is just the most important on the game.
But sometimes they have, like their coaches and whatnot on the sidelines. Have you ever had a situation where, because sometimes there can be this doesn't happen regularly, but sometimes there can be a violation if there's too much coaching coming from the stands. Have you ever been in a situation like that?
Yeah, there's certainly issues with coaches, and obviously with the language barriers around the world. Players obviously speak different languages, and therefore, particularly in Australia where there aren't too many Australians running around, but there's a lot of European backgrounds particularly, and there's a lot of issues that tend to happen with coaches and players, and obviously there's rulings that you're not allowed to coach from the stands. So it can be a fairly tough one for umpires to monitor because of language barriers, and you can't really be certain of what they're saying. But certainly a couple of times, like, coaches will come past our ball kids and say, okay, can you deliver a pair of shoes or drinks or whatever it is to a ex-player? And you don't really know what you're doing. Like, you don't really know what you could be giving them, particularly when it's fluids or any food or whatever. So there could be issues with that. But generally the ball kids don't really have too many issues with the coaches and stuff. But there's certainly issues with the umpires, no doubt.
Is that the chair umpire's job to decide if there's a violation in the coaching stands, or is that another? Yeah,
it's the chair umpire's role that he or she will sort of call it a code violation, but they ask the chair umpires will always ask line umpires if they're hearing anything untoward. So if there's a line umpire sitting on a baseline. And here's a coach behind them talking to the player, then that line umpire will go up to the chair umpire and say, look, there's a coach behind here who's having an issue coaching players. And it probably suggests that it's time to make sure that stops.
And when you were a ball boy, who did you answer to in those matches? Like, for instance, did you have anyone, I assume you did, any kind of supervisor, supervising you, or is that the chair umpire's job? For instance, if you have someone who's not feeling quite well because of the heat during a match, whose job is it to signal that, okay, this ball boy or ball girl needs to be replaced? Do you have replacements on the side as well? Like,
what happens with the heat and the issues with ill kids, that what will happen, they should go and tell the chair umpire or either a line umpire and say, look, I'm in trouble, I need to go off the court, and that's fine. They do that and they go off to the side of the court, and that's then our role as supervisors to attend to those kids and ensure that we have replacements sent out. So the replacements won't be sitting courtside. They'll be sitting in our marquee area, and we'll have our walkie-talkies and say, yep, look, such and such has come off court 3. He's a bit unwell. Can we have someone replace him? And then a kid who isn't assigned on the court will come out and replace them. But yeah, as supervisors, that's sort of our role to look after the well-being of kids. Yeah.
And what kind of training did you have to go through to become a supervisor?
It wasn't so much training. It was more interviews and stuff. And then we go through the training process with the kids. So we train the kids probably half a dozen times from, as I say, sort of June, July at least, if not more. And sort of at the time, while you're going through that process, you're sort of learning on the job in a way. But I think it sort of helped me, the fact that I was a ball kid only a few years ago, I sort of had the understanding of the skills required and the knowledge required from the kids. So I sort of was one step ahead in a way. So yeah, that certainly helped.
Oh, so you don't have to be previously a part of the ball kid squad to apply for that kind of role?
No, not necessarily. A lot of us are, but we have...
Yeah, it would help, obviously,
We have quite a lot of school teachers and tennis coaches who will come in and take on the role. But yeah, we certainly do have a lot of ex-ball kids. There's no doubt about that.
So what month is this a relatively new role? Or have you done this for...
Yeah, no, this is my first year in the role. But I started my training process in sort of June, July. So I've sort of been in the role for 6 months, and yeah, this will be my first Australian Open in the role.
So what did you do in that initial phase? Did you teach like the ball kids what the certain skills you need to do to monitor a tennis match?
Yeah, we went through the training process with the kids, and we taught them the skills that were required, and then obviously the match went through match simulation with them. So like what their roles are required during certain situations in a match, and sort of giving them feedback and assessing them and making sure to then produce the final squad. So in June, July, we don't have anywhere near the final squad. There's quite a few that will then miss out from that squad, which is a shame because, as we always say, we'd love to take them all, but we can't take that many. But yeah, so we go through that training process, assessing process to then produce the final squad, which is sort of later in the year, ready for January.
Is there a particular skill that is quite difficult to teach?
Yeah, probably. It looks pretty simple, but the rolling skills isn't as simple as it looks, because there's a lot that goes into it that people probably don't realise. It's not just getting the ball from one end of the court to the other. It's the way it gets down there. So we make sure we want them to be as flat as they can, so they roll right on the ground. They're as quick as they can, and they maintain their accuracy at the same time. So it can be a challenge. There's no doubt about that, and it can take a couple of years to work out. If you go through the 380 kids, there's probably 380 different techniques in them. So it's not necessarily a technique that we teach them. We tell them, this is what we want from you, and you can sort of work out in a way how you can do it. Yeah. So they all have their own techniques that works for them and feels comfortable for them. But yeah, it's probably a bit harder than a lot of people probably realise. Yeah,
because that's why I mentioned it before when we started. Like what kind of skills you train. Because I didn't mean that like flippantly. Like obviously, when you're rolling a tennis ball, like if you don't roll it correctly, sometimes it can just like bounce and go off. And I must admit, I must compliment Tennis Australia. Just like when in the Australian Open, the ball boys or ball girls just seem really, switched on and well trained. How do they get to that process where they make very minimal mistakes? Is it just a really comprehensive training program?
Yeah, it's certainly the comprehensive training, but also it's just practice and sort of the knowledge of okay, I can do it.
Yeah.
A lot of what we teach the kids is not necessarily the skills, but knowing that they've got the skills and then applying them. So the match practice is certainly great for them during training process, but then when you get out into the proper match courts out in sort of December and January when there's proper matches with something on the line, we try to teach the kids to take it on in a way. So it's, in putting it in tennis terms, it would be, we don't want them to be just sort of hitting it back and over the net really easily. We want them to be trying to go for the winner, if you know what I mean. Like, don't be afraid sort of thing. Don't be afraid of making mistakes.
Yes.
And more often than not, when they do that, that's when they don't make the mistakes. They feel that confidence inside them. They go, okay, I know what I'm doing. I've got the skill. I'm capable of doing it. So, yeah, don't be worried about making mistakes. And that's where they become so good.
Have you ever been a part of a tennis match where, because obviously, you know, tempers can flare during a tennis match. There's a lot on the line, especially in the Australian Open. Have you ever been on a part of a tennis match where you've spectated a match or you were a part of it, and the tennis player in question was, I don't know, like breaking a racket or just like, you know, just like really like screaming and...
Yeah, obviously, I think a couple of years ago we all saw the incidents with Marcos Bagdatis.
Yeah, he broke how many rackets was it? Like 3?
I think it was more like 5 or 6. Yeah. It was certainly one of the more extraordinary things I think I've ever seen. But I think there's barely a match that goes by where there isn't issues with line calls and umpiring decisions.
Even with Hawkeye.
Yeah, even with Hawkeye. Players have issues with that, and then sort of... like the rules around the decisions and like when there's overrules and when there's Hawkeye issues, all that kind of stuff. So you see a lot of matches where players have issues with umpires. Generally, the issues with the kids aren't really major. Players don't tend to have too many issues with the kids, except maybe when they lose a bit of concentration. But the players do tend to be pretty good with the kids, which is great. But yeah, there's certainly plenty of instances where, players get aggressive towards umpires, towards even spectators when they're making noise or when they're moving and all that kind of stuff. You do have, particularly in Grand Slams where there's so much money on the line, world rankings, and then obviously the prestige being the singles champion or the doubles champion. So there's plenty on the line, but our players are pretty good with the kids as well. So.
One particular incident comes to my mind, and that's it wasn't in the Australian Open, and that was the David Nalbandian case where I think he literally kicked a line umpire. I think
that wasn't great.
That was one of the most extraordinary things.
And we also had the issues with Serena Williams. I think it was at the US Open.
Yeah.
I think it was when she played Sam Stosur in that final. I think she threatened to throw a ball down the umpire's throat or something like that. Something along the lines of that. Which, that's when I think the heat of the moment gets to a player, and the fact that they're in a US Open singles final, it's as big a stage as any. So the heat of the moment, she probably would regret it now, I'd imagine. But in the heat of the moment, you kind of don't really know what you're doing in a way.
Do you have any specific conduct rules when it comes to the ball kid squad?
Yeah, we certainly have expectations of the kids on and off the court. Not necessarily, they're not too sort of complex or anything, but they're more sort of based around the way they conduct themselves on the site, the way they approach media, and also just any random patron. Because no matter what uniform they're in, any sort of Tennis Australia employee will be asked questions by patrons. Just because they see people in uniform, they ask questions about the tournament, about the site, about who's playing where, who's training where, all that kind of stuff. And we make sure that the kids are at least given the information required, that they know sort of the basics, and also the way they wear their uniforms and that kind of stuff. So there's fairly simple expectations, but if they keep inside those expectations and they perform well on court, that's when they're rewarded.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about, we were talking about this before actually, was there was one incident where Roger Federer, this went absolutely viral and got millions of views. Roger Federer was playing Rafael Nadal, and he hits the ball kind of just casually to a a ball boy who was at the net and he caught it just like, one hand. Apparently, him. Was that quite a thrill? Because when the camera was on him, he was kind of like smiling a bit.
Yeah, that was, I think it was in the 2012 Australian Open.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It's coming up on 4 years now. It seems to go quick.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that was a current actually supervisor, Dylan, who at the time was obviously a ball kid. I think it was a men's semi-final.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fairly significant moment for the squad, but also for him, obviously. As a result of that, he had quite a significant amount of media coverage.
Yeah.
To the point where I think some of those YouTube videos have gotten like 10, 20 million views.
Yeah, heaps.
Yeah, it was certainly a very impressive catch, but we've talked about it enough for the last 4 years.
Yeah, especially amongst the squad.
A lot of people have seen it. A lot of people now know Dylan. And the following year, he was actually a part of that singles final with me in 2013.
That's
and he was what's known as our top gun in that year, which means our top ball boy and top ball girl from every year, rewarded as given the honour as the top gun, and that was him in 2013.
Oh wow, that's quite. So was that catch in particular an individual skill, or obviously there's individual skill involved, but do you practice kind of like eye-hand coordination when you're training the skills of ball boys and girls?
Yeah, no doubt. There's plenty of hand-eye coordinations that are required, but there's certainly no catching practice.
No catching practice. Yeah,
we don't have anyone hitting catches at them like it's a cricket game. But yeah, in some ways it was a bit of natural talent, I think, but it's also the hand-eye coordination involved with the job, given that the ball can be coming at you pretty quickly, particularly on serves. So kids have to be ready, making sure they're not getting hit by tennis balls. But yeah, I think a lot of it was natural talent on Dylan's part.
Oh, that's another thing as well. Yeah, the serves. I mean, you're not in the line of fire, but you're quite near it. Who was the fastest server that you've witnessed on court?
It's probably two, I'd say. One was Australian Sam Groth, that we were talking about before.
Yes, he's quick.
But the other one I thought of straight away was he's now one of the top 10 players in the world, I think, just about. But I first saw him in qualifying, in my first or second year maybe. Milos Raonic. He serves probably 210, 220 at least.
Consistently.
Yeah, and does it easily. But he was on one of those outside courts, which for anyone who's seen the site at Melbourne Park, they're much smaller than the show courts at Centre Court, Hisense Arena, etc. So there's a lot smaller gap between where he serves it to where we stand.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And that was one of the more frightening things I think I've ever seen, because they were coming very, very quickly. And yeah, he's certainly one that is very, very quick. And probably also Gael Monfils, the French player. He's as extraordinary a player as I've ever seen, just some of the things he can do, but his serve is fairly powerful. And I know at least one kid who was on the end of one a few years ago, not in a great spot, but he's a fairly powerful athlete as well. Yeah,
Gael Monfils, I mean, he's a remarkable athlete. I mean, he can get to balls which, some tennis players...
allowed to, really.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary something he can do.
So which match did you were you involved in with him?
I had Gael Monfils on more than one occasion, but probably the most memorable one with Gael Monfils was a night match down at Hisense Arena. He played his countryman, Jules Simon. From what I remember, it was around about a 4.5 hour match. It was just epic. It was a 5-set match. It went forever. Well, I think one stage, Monfils looked like he was gone, like game over, couldn't barely walk, and then I think he ended up coming back and winning the game. It was extraordinary, one of the more extraordinary matches I think I've been a part of. But the atmosphere inside Hisense Arena that night was unbelievable. I'll give you a plug. There's actually a YouTube video of Joshua in the video himself as a ball boy, and one of those was a 72-shot rally between Jules Simon. I don't know if you remember that specifically, but the Jules Simon and Gael Monfils. I think it was about 72 shots. Yeah, that felt like it was going to go forever. I didn't think it was ever going to end. They just kept hitting the ball back and forth, back and forth.
Wasn't it just like backhand to backhand? And then, yeah.
Just extraordinary. Yeah. And then, I think when the point did eventually finish, the crowd went, it lit up the place.
Oh, yeah, and they were just like hands and knees. And just like...
Couldn't believe it. It was extraordinary.
Mm-hmm. And is there a difference between... so have you officiated 5-set matches?
Yeah, that one certainly was a 5-set match. That was a long 5-set match.
Oh, yeah, that was a 5-set match, yeah.
But yeah, certainly plenty that... I think one of the nights I had with Leighton Hewitt was a 5-set match as well, from what I remember. If it wasn't a 5-set match, it was definitely a very long 4-set match. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's certainly plenty of 5-set matches, and I think some of the most memorable ones are the ones out on the sort of the outside courts when the crowds are really close, like on a show court 3 at Melbourne Park. Mm-hmm. I think last year one of the most memorable matches of the whole tournament was probably the Nasi Kokonakis. Went out on show court 3. Yeah. You couldn't get a seat if you tried, and just the atmosphere was electric, and you ended up getting up in a 5-set match. One of the more unbelievable games of the tournament, no doubt. How
long did that go for?
I reckon it was at least 4 hours, and it was finished very late in the night. It was, the atmosphere come sort of 11 o'clock to midnight was, unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Do you train your Ball Kids squad to manage that kind of duration, or does that come down to experiencing the actual match?
Our training sessions aren't that long. They're certainly not 4 or 5 hours long. They're only sort of an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But given that they're not on court for the entire 5 hours, they're generally most of them are fit enough that they can survive and all that. But particularly on the warm days, that's when we make sure they're hydrated and well fed, because that's when issues can occur with illnesses and stuff. So, generally, the concentration and fitness is fine, particularly in matches like those when the atmosphere is as good as it is.
Yeah.
There's sort of no excuse to be not concentrating or not awake, if you know what I mean. So, yeah.
Was there any correlation with that role as a ball boy and your other role as a AFL ball steward?
Not a lot, I'll be honest, except for the fact that I was the ball boy, I guess, in both roles. But the AFL role was certainly very different.
Could imagine a lot easier.
Certainly much easier physically, without the running around and all that kind of stuff. And there wasn't so much, not pressure, because not pressure on the kids at the Australian Open, but there's almost pressure on themselves. They put a lot of pressure on themselves. But at the AFL, there's certainly no pressure on the ball stewards in their role.
How many ball stewards are present at an AFL match?
For one game, we have 2, so there's one at each end. But overall, there's about 15 to 20, I think, ball stewards.
And obviously, would that be to control the different, because there's more than one football used at an AFL match? Is that part of your responsibility as well? Yeah,
we have five footies on the ground at any one time. There's obviously during a game, ball gets kicked into the crowd, and then a player is allowed to take a ball out of our bag, and we retrieve the ball that gets in the crowd. So yeah, because the AFL introduced a rule, I think it was a couple of years ago now. I'm just wondering if you were. I think you were around that time, where when the opposition kicked a point, the defender didn't have to wait for the umpire to say, "Oh, you can kick now." You could just go. Did that affect like how quick you had to throw back the ball sometimes? Nah, it's not really our area. What the rule was, it used to be that you had to wait until the umpires waved the flag before they were allowed to kick out. But now they can kick out as soon as the umpires signalled the behind. But our role isn't to throw the balls to the players. They're supposed to retrieve the ball from the bag. So we're not allowed. The rule states that we're not allowed to throw the ball to them. They have to actually get it themselves.
Yeah.
So it's not. It's not that we're throwing the ball to them. So it doesn't really affect the ball stewards at all.
And were you present at an AFL grand final in that role?
I was in 2014 when Hawthorn played Sydney. That was probably the best day of my life. There's no doubt about that. That was something I'll never forget.
Even more special than the Australian Open, any of the Australian Open events?
It was certainly different, I think.
Different atmosphere, yeah.
Yeah, a very different atmosphere. And I think particularly in Melbourne, the AFL and it's a 6-month build-up from the start of March or end of March through to September. It's a fairly significant build-up, whereas obviously the Australian Open's a 2-week event and it's over in a jiffy kind of thing. So AFL season is such a long season, and then the build-up to the finals and then the grand final. There's so many stories to be told from those 6 months. And then, Hawthorn and Sydney, that was sort of the return of Lance Franklin against Hawthorn.
That was a good match too, wasn't it? Was that the close one?
No, that was the one that went. The Hawks, the Hawks won by 10 goals.
Oh, well, you were part of that match.
Yeah, that was the grand final. Right. I was out there, but the build-up prior to that game was unbelievable. With obviously Lance Franklin against Hawthorn again. The decision that Hawthorn were going to have to make whether Cyril Rioli played in that grand final, which he ended up playing. And there was all sorts of other things that. Sort of other stories like Josh Kennedy playing against Hawthorn again, given the Kennedy name at the Hawks. All sorts of sort of little stories that went with that grand final that were extraordinary. And then obviously Sydney played Hawthorn 2 years prior to that in 2012 and beat them. And then the Hawks have come back 2 years later and smashed them in the grand final. So that was a massive day, no doubt about that.
And how's the view like from that angle, from the goal square? But you're like right, in the thick of you have a good view of it.
Yeah.
Is it a lot different to when you're...
Yeah, it certainly is. Obviously sitting right behind the goals, basically not quite in the goal umpire's position, but fairly close. Because you're inside the actual ground. Yeah, so you're on the ground. You're just inside the stand, just before the stands. It's in a similar way to sitting in the front row of the ground. But there is sort of a distorted view a little bit. You can't really... It's hard to see things at the other end of the ground.
Okay.
But in that forward 50 that you're at, it's you're right up there. You can feel the hits, and you can hear some of the things they say. But it's certainly a pretty awesome view.
And did you get to notice more the speed of the game? Because that's one of the noticeable differences of AFL, not just between the older eras, but just between the years gone by. AFL players, they're a lot fitter now. Their pre-seasons are quite brutal. Obviously, did you notice more the how fast the game was? Did you notice those subtle intricacies, or did you already notice them when you were in the stands?
Yeah, it's a quick game as it is, but I think throughout that 2014 season, I worked the whole season. But then even I did the first elimination final was Essendon and North Melbourne. And you could see that speed and the intensity in that game pick up a little bit from the sort of the 3 weeks, month before during the home and away season. And then again the following week when North Melbourne played Geelong in the semi-final, picked up again. But then 2 weeks later in the last day in the grand final, you could see the intensity of that game, particularly in the first quarter when the game was on the line. It was something you'll never see.
Yeah.
Intensity and the atmosphere in that game.
And in the future, do you plan, because obviously you have a real passion for sport, do you plan to still stay involved? And if so, what do you plan to connect to next?
Yeah, without a doubt, sport's my passion and sport's what I want to do for the rest of my life. I'm studying sports management at the moment at La Trobe, and having been involved at both the Australian Open and now with the AFL, I've got a taste sort of what I want to do. I want to be involved in sport. Where that takes me, I don't really know 100%. But whether it's at a club level or whether it's at a league level, I don't know. But sport is my passion and certainly what I want to do.
So what's your course called again that you study?
I'm just doing a Bachelor of Business and majoring in sports management.
Oh, yeah, what does sports management involve?
It's more the administration of sport. So the background, I guess. Event work, and sort of the numbers, I guess. That's where I think some of the stuff I've been involved in will hopefully help me in the future,
yeah,
no doubt.
Most certainly, because you started out as a Australian Open ball boy. Well, did you start out when you were 12? So the youngest age that you could be.
Yeah. So my first Australian Open was in 2010. I was 12. I was only a few weeks away from turning 13, but I was 12 years of age, and then did 4 Australian Opens: 2010, 11, 12, and 13, before my 15th birthday, or just after my 15th birthday. So yeah.
And so as supervisor, you told me this was your first year. What did you do in? So was 2014 more devoted to your role as an AFL ball steward as opposed to an Australian Open?
No, I still worked at the Australian Open in 2014 and 2015. I had a volunteer role within the Hot Shots program. Anyone who doesn't know, the Hot Shots program is a kids program that gets kids into tennis. It's not. It's designed to make it easier for kids to play tennis with the smaller courts, softer balls, so it's a bit easier for kids to play tennis. And I was involved in promoting that program for a couple of years, and then I saw the opportunity to get back into the ball kids squad, and I certainly took it because I know the experience that those kids have, and it's certainly one that I want to be a part of again. Absolutely.
And the promotion side of it, like what was involved there?
It was more sort of activities on the ground. So during the tournament, the activities involved, we just set up sort of activities and gave them information about the program, and
Well, Josh, I think that's the first podcast we've gone for over an hour, on video at least. So yeah, thank you for coming on. It was really quite fascinating to explain your role in the Australian Open and your role as an AFL ball steward. So yeah, thank you for coming on the